If you have too many interests, if your mind constantly jumps from philosophy to physics, from art to entrepreneurship, from psychology to technology, if you feel deeply curious about everything and yet fully committed to nothing, you may possess what I call a synoptic mind. The word synoptic comes from the idea of seeing things together, seeing the whole picture at once. A synoptic mind does not like to live inside narrow lanes. It naturally scans the horizon. It connects dots. It sees patterns across different domains that most people keep separate. It is not scattered in the way people assume. It is expansive. This psychological pattern exists because the human brain is fundamentally a prediction and pattern-making machine. Some brains are wired to specialize deeply, narrowing focus and filtering out distractions. Other brains are wired to scan widely, constantly searching for connections across seemingly unrelated ideas. The synoptic mind belongs to the second category. From a neuroscientific perspective, this tendency is often linked to heightened activity in associative networks of the brain, particularly in regions connected to creativity, abstract thinking, and integrative processing. When these networks are highly active, the mind does not experience interests as isolated compartments. It experiences them as interconnected pieces of a larger puzzle. Developmentally, this pattern can begin in childhood. A child with a synoptic mind often asks why repeatedly, not just about one topic but about everything. They may read about dinosaurs one week, space the next, mythology after that, and then suddenly become obsessed with how machines work. Parents may initially see this as curiosity, then as inconsistency. Teachers may label them as bright but distracted. Over time, the child internalizes messages from the environment. If curiosity is nurtured, the synoptic mind grows confidently. If it is criticized, the person may begin to see their wide-ranging interests as a flaw. Psychologically, the synoptic mind often emerges from a combination of high openness to experience, strong intrinsic motivation, and a cognitive style that values integration over isolation. These individuals are stimulated by novelty. Dopamine pathways in the brain respond strongly to new information, new challenges, and new perspectives. They feel energized when exploring unfamiliar territory. However, this does not mean they are incapable of depth. In fact, many people with a synoptic mind can dive deeply into a subject, but once they grasp the core structure of it, their mind begins searching for the next connection, the next bridge to build. When you observe someone with a synoptic mind, you will notice certain behaviors. In conversation, they often draw parallels between topics. You might mention economics, and they respond by referencing evolutionary biology or storytelling. This is not random. It reflects a brain that is constantly mapping similarities across domains. Their body language may show excitement when discussing ideas, with animated gestures and rapid shifts in expression as new connections form in real time. They may speak quickly when inspired, as if trying to keep up with their own thoughts. If a person frequently shifts projects, hobbies, or career interests, this can reveal several psychological layers. It may indicate a strong desire for intellectual stimulation and growth. It may also reflect a fear of stagnation. Sometimes it reveals an intolerance for boredom that is not laziness but neurological sensitivity. However, if the switching is accompanied by unfinished tasks, chronic guilt, or anxiety, it may suggest difficulty with sustained attention, perfectionism, or fear of failure. The behavior alone does not tell the full story. The emotional tone behind it does. If someone has many interests but rarely shares them publicly, that often indicates a different internal dynamic. It may reveal self-doubt or fear of judgment. A synoptic mind that has been criticized may hide its expansiveness to avoid being labeled as unfocused. On the other hand, when a person openly embraces their multiple interests and speaks about them confidently, it usually indicates a secure identity structure. They do not need to fit into one box to feel valid. Now consider the opposite. When a person does not show wide-ranging interests, when they prefer a narrow and consistent path, this does not mean they lack intelligence or curiosity. It suggests a different cognitive orientation. Some minds feel safest and most fulfilled when mastering a single domain. Psychologically, this can reflect high conscientiousness, strong need for structure, and satisfaction derived from incremental progress within defined boundaries. If such a person avoids exploring other interests, it may reveal comfort with predictability, or sometimes fear of incompetence outside their expertise. The synoptic mind often experiences internal tension. On one hand, it craves variety. On the other, it lives in a world that rewards specialization. This creates a subtle identity conflict. These individuals may ask themselves, "What am I really?" They may feel pressure to choose one label: engineer, writer, entrepreneur, artist. Yet their internal experience does not fit neatly into a single category. This mismatch between inner complexity and outer expectation can generate anxiety. In daily life, this psychology shows up in decision-making patterns. A person with a synoptic mind may struggle when forced to choose one opportunity over another because they can vividly imagine multiple futures. When offered a job in finance, they simultaneously imagine what it would be like to study psychology, start a business, or travel and document stories. Their brain runs parallel simulations. This makes them insightful but also indecisive. The indecision is not due to lack of desire. It is due to an abundance of possibility. Emotionally, these individuals often feel excitement and overwhelm at the same time. They may wake up inspired by a new idea, spend hours researching it, feel alive and energized, and then suddenly experience a crash when they realize they cannot pursue everything at once. This emotional cycle can create guilt. They may accuse themselves of being inconsistent. But psychologically, what is happening is cognitive abundance meeting practical limitation. Socially, the synoptic mind can be both admired and misunderstood. Friends may see them as interesting, dynamic, full of knowledge. At gatherings, they can engage in conversations about technology, art, history, and human behavior with equal enthusiasm. Yet some people may perceive them as scattered or unreliable if they frequently change plans or priorities. In relationships, partners may struggle to understand why their interests evolve so rapidly. If not communicated well, this can create insecurity on both sides. Subconsciously, many people with a synoptic mind are driven by a deep need for meaning. They are not satisfied with surface-level engagement. They want to understand systems, patterns, and underlying principles. This drive can come from intellectual curiosity, but sometimes it is rooted in early life experiences. For example, a child who grew up in an unpredictable environment may develop strong pattern recognition skills as a survival mechanism. They learn to scan widely, to anticipate shifts, to connect subtle cues. In adulthood, this can manifest as a broad and integrative thinking style. However, there are psychological side effects to living with a synoptic mind in a world structured for specialists. One common issue is chronic self-doubt. When a person sees peers advancing steadily in one career while they themselves are exploring multiple paths, they may feel behind. This comparison can erode self-esteem. They might internalize the belief that they lack discipline, even if their exploration is deeply thoughtful. Another impact is decision fatigue. Because the synoptic mind sees many options, it expends significant mental energy evaluating them. Over time, this can lead to burnout. The individual may feel mentally exhausted not because they have done too much, but because they have considered too much. The constant simulation of alternative futures can drain emotional resources. Productivity can also be affected. Starting new projects often feels exhilarating. Finishing them requires sustained focus and tolerance for routine. If a person repeatedly abandons projects at the first sign of boredom, this can create a pattern of incomplete achievements. The psychological consequence is a subtle erosion of trust in oneself. Each unfinished task becomes evidence in the internal narrative of, "I never stick with anything." Over years, this narrative can solidify into a limiting belief. Mental health struggles may emerge when the synoptic mind is combined with high perfectionism. The person may want to excel in every interest. When they realize this is impossible, they may experience anxiety or depressive thoughts. The gap between ideal self and real self feels wide. In some cases, symptoms may overlap with attention-related conditions. It is important, however, not to pathologize curiosity. A synoptic mind is not inherently disordered. The distress arises from misalignment between cognitive style and environment. In relationships, this mindset can create misunderstandings. A partner might interpret changing interests as instability or lack of commitment, but psychologically, changing interests often reflects growth and exploration, not emotional inconsistency. If the individual fails to communicate this internal process, resentment can build. Conversely, if they learn to articulate their pattern, relationships can become richer and more dynamic. Long-term consequences depend largely on self-awareness. A synoptic mind without self-understanding may drift, accumulating knowledge but lacking integration into a coherent life path. This can lead to midlife crises characterized by regret over unpursued mastery. But a synoptic mind with conscious structure can become extraordinarily innovative. Many interdisciplinary breakthroughs come from individuals who refuse to stay in one intellectual box. When psychologists analyze this behavior, they do not simply count the number of hobbies or career changes. They observe patterns over time. They listen to the emotional language the person uses when describing their interests. Is there excitement, shame, restlessness? They pay attention to cognitive distortions, such as all-or-nothing thinking. For example, if a person says, "If I can't be the best at this, there's no point continuing," that reveals perfectionistic schemas driving their behavior. Observation techniques include examining how quickly a person shifts topics in conversation, how they respond to boredom, and how they handle routine tasks. Emotional triggers are important. Does the person lose interest when initial novelty fades? Do they withdraw when tasks become repetitive? These patterns reveal the interplay between dopamine-driven curiosity and executive functioning skills. Psychologists also explore underlying beliefs about identity. Many individuals with a synoptic mind struggle with the question, "Who am I if I am many things?" Through therapy, they may learn to see identity not as a single label, but as a dynamic system. Cognitive behavioral approaches help identify unhelpful beliefs such as, "I must choose one thing to be legitimate." Narrative therapy techniques can assist them in constructing a cohesive life story that integrates diverse interests into a meaningful arc. Subconscious signs of internal conflict may include procrastination on major decisions, excessive research, without action, or sudden bursts of enthusiasm followed by withdrawal. These behaviors are not random. They often reflect fear of closing doors. Choosing one path symbolically means letting go of others. For a synoptic mind, this feels like losing parts of oneself. Yet there is extraordinary strength here. The ability to synthesize across domains fosters creativity, innovation, and empathy. Because these individuals engage with many perspectives, they often develop flexible thinking. They can adapt to changing environments more easily than rigid specialists. In times of rapid social or technological transformation, this flexibility becomes invaluable. The key psychological task for a person with a synoptic mind is integration rather than suppression. Instead of forcing themselves into one narrow lane, they can design a life structure that accommodates multiple interests in cycles or layers. They can choose a primary focus while reserving space for exploration. This reduces internal conflict and protects mental health. Ultimately, having too many interests is not a flaw. It is a cognitive style with both gifts and challenges. The synoptic mind sees what others miss. It connects what others separate. But without self-awareness, it can become overwhelmed by its own expansiveness. The journey, therefore, is not about reducing curiosity. It is about cultivating discernment, emotional regulation, and self-compassion. When you understand this pattern, you begin to see yourself differently. You stop labeling yourself as inconsistent or unfocused. You recognize that your mind was designed to scan horizons, to weave threads, to see wholes instead of fragments. And with that recognition comes responsibility. The responsibility to build structures that support your nature. The responsibility to finish what truly matters. The responsibility to honor your depth without drowning in your breadth. The synoptic mind is not about having too many interests. It is about having a mind that refuses to live in small rooms. And when guided with awareness, discipline, and psychological insight, that mind can create connections, innovations, and meanings that narrow thinking could never achieve.